The film Blade Runner was actually my gateway into science fiction. Later, I went and read the book by Philip K. Dick, and I realized how different that book was from the movie. So today we're going to talk about adaptations and why it's useful as a writer to look through the nuance between a book and its adaptation.
There is a discourse online that to make a good adaptation, you need to change things. I don't think that's necessarily always the case, but I do think the easiest way for adaptations to fail is when the creator doesn't understand what kind of adaptation they're making. And each of these different kinds of adaptations have pros and cons and risks associated with making these. The first kind of adaptation, the faithful adaptation, is exactly what it sounds like. I like to think of whoever is adapting it being like a window pane. They're just trying to be a communicator of what the original series is and putting that into the medium of their choice, whether that be movie or game or whatever. In a faithful adaptation, they change as little as possible, changing only what is absolutely necessary for the adaptation to actually occur. Some great examples of faithful adaptations are Little Women, The Martian, Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone. These are stories that don't necessarily need to lean on the medium of what they're on. One of the downsides with faithful adaptations is when people are too slavish to the source material when things needed to be changed. Different mediums have different strengths. Movies are really good at visual cues, really good at imagery, really good at beat-by-beat fight scenes. Novels are much better at jumping huge portions of time, about hiding exposition, about having narrative and character voice much easier than it is in a movie. When directors don't realize that there is something integral to the story that leans on the strength of that medium and they don't transition it between mediums, that's when these faithful adaptations can start to crumble. A good way of thinking about this is David Lynch's Dune movie. In the book, it has an omnipotent POV, and the book will show the character's inner thoughts constantly. Now, David Lynch tried to replicate this by having narration over the movie.
Yes, perhaps he would have that.
This works really well in a novel, does not work very well in a movie. It comes off super awkward and weird. Now, the new movie interprets this and still keeps its main thread.
So when we're talking about adaptations and them being faithful, you should ask the question, what type of story am I telling? And can it go from book to movie? When you look at something like Shawshank Redemption, it is a phenomenal film. It works really well as a movie because it is a novella. So its length is already shorter. And so you can basically one-to-one that book to a film. Another good example is No Country for Old Men and The Road, both by Cormac McCarthy. The way that Cormac writes, it almost could be a screenplay by itself. And so when you watch those movies, you're going to see very little differences. The original vision of the author comes through very clear. Another faithful adaptation is season 1 of Game of Thrones. Now, the later seasons do stray from the source material a decent bit, but those earlier ones, especially season 1, are almost beat for beat. You have a long book to begin with, and so you have a lot to play with. I really like the way Martin writes. He does write kind of like a screenplay in a way, but he has also all these additive things in his world and all these interconnecting plots and threads that it works so well if you just throw it on a screen. Shows in a way can be better for books because they have more time to explore things.
That leads us into the second kind of adaptation, and that would be interpretive adaptation. Interpretive adaptations still try to keep the same core aspects of the story, but are not slavish to how they do those core aspects. Now, you have to be really careful when you are changing the form of these things because you can inadvertently be changing the function. An example of this is the new Witcher TV show that came out recently. In this TV show, one of the main characters, Ciri, goes along all of these adventures with this group of ruffians called the Rats. Now, this happens in the book, but the function of these rats changes dramatically from the books to the TV show. In the books, these rats are extremely manipulative. They almost abuse Ciri in a lot of different ways. And a lot of this sets up really interesting character arcs for Ciri later about her naivety that are integral for her character arc. Now, in the TV show, they changed these rats to be a lovable group of like Peter Pan ruffians. What the director didn't understand when they were doing this was how much they are undermining so many character arcs by making this small change. That's changing the form and the function by, once again, not understanding what threads were connected to a change like that.
Dune is such a good example of interpretive adaptation, especially the 2021 film, because it really captures the spirit or the essence, and you can really see that when you go and watch this movie. There's significant changes that do happen, but when you watch the movie, you are so engrossed in the world, and I feel like Denny really captured that spirit of it. Most of the famous adaptations that you hear about or see are going to fall more on that interpretive side. Think of things like Gone with the Wind or Hunger Games, The Green Mile, Princess Bride. These are all really good movies that aren't necessarily faithful to their source material, but they stand really well on their own. Stephen King even said when he saw the Mist adaptation that he liked the ending more than his own. So sometimes directors or writers can improve upon the original source material. I love the novel, The War of the Worlds. The Spielberg film in 2005, I feel like it does a good job in some areas and then it misses the mark in others. It's interesting because it tonally shifts things. The book has a very strict point of view of the narrator who's not even named. I love the tone of that book because it's confusing and you're not really sure what's happening and you don't really understand the Martians and what their whole motive is. The Spielberg film opens with a monologue and I feel like that immediately just kills the tone that the book was trying to set.
No one would have believed in the early years of the 21st century.
In the end, the movie does do a good job of still communicating the message that the book had. But again, there's this tonal shift that happens. An interesting example with interpretive character work, when you look at Arwen from the Fellowship of the Ring, you can see that she basically takes the role of multiple characters that were originally in the book, and it allows her to be more active in the story and to show off some of her powers and skills or even some of her motives. And I feel like it really explores more for her and keeps her more in the forefront. I think some people don't like that, but I think it's a really nice addition to give depth to Arwen. In contrast, if you look at the Hobbit films, they added a love triangle, for instance, between Tauriel, Keeley, and Legolas. There's always been a conflict between elves and dwarves, so it already doesn't make sense. But then you're taking up unnecessary runtime to have this sort of tension in terms of like a budding romance. And overall, it just doesn't add anything. It doesn't really get to show any type of character depth. And they also, in The Hobbit, they just changed the tone by adding a lot of action sequences or even just drawing out scenes that didn't need to be drawn out. And you can see that that was more of a runtime interest than anything.
Now, this leads us into the third form of adaptation, which we are calling loose adaptations. If faithful adaptations keep form and function, and interpretive take out form but keep function, loose adaptations go against both form and function. These kinds of adaptations are probably the riskiest that a director or another creator can possibly do because you are fundamentally going against the source material. But some of our best adaptations are this, so I don't think they're necessarily always a bad thing. Some of these include Starship Troopers, I Am Legend, The Haunting of Hill House. These stories fundamentally change the form and function of the story and almost use the concept of the original story as a jumping off point, not concerned with the landing of the original. Now, usually, I think this goes pretty poorly. One of the examples of this is Legend of the Seeker. The original story by Terry Goodkind is a deep thematic story about truth and individualism, and the Legend of the Seeker TV show basically throws that to the wayside to just have a fun story about a guy with a cool sword. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but it does kind of spit in the face of the original. When loose adaptations fail, it's when they either don't understand or stomp on the theme of the original. When these succeed, they almost add to the conversation of the original theme. When a director or creator understands the original so well that they can not only change it, but comment on the original. One of the examples of this is Starship Troopers, where the original novel is very like pro-military and pro-authoritarianism. The movie can almost laugh in the face of the original Heinlein story and be anti-fascism and anti-military and all these things, almost in a way of making it look like a propaganda movie. It adds to the conversation rather than retracting from it.
Talking about additive, that's where I think I loved Blade Runner so much, is because it added to the novel and changed a lot of stuff, and I ended up really liking it. Keeping the same characters and the same themes, Ridley Scott really understood the source material. Talking about The Shining, another one that I think is an additive piece. I think it departures a good bit from the source material. I feel like it changes Jack's motives a bit in defining who he was and his temptation with evil and stuff that you see in the movie. But that doesn't take away from the film itself. I think it's still a masterclass in filming and storytelling. Even Fight Club is just one that most people agree is better than the book. Even the author himself has said that he thinks the movie is better than his own work. So a lot of these loose adaptations, they're not bad, they're really good. And it's because I think the director really understood the material and then built upon it.
A lot of directors that have created adaptations that are not well loved have often cited this idea that these adaptations are a new interpretation and the original material is still there, so fans shouldn't be angry that these adaptations change things. I think that's a fundamental misunderstanding of what adaptations are to a lot of these fans. A lot of these fans love these original works and want to see them on the big screen or the small screen. And saying something like that not only, I think, spits in the faces of a lot of these fans' love for these stories, but also shows they had no understanding of the original love and just wanted to kind of make their own thing, but have the marketing of the original. These adaptations can be a really interesting opportunity to have, even if you are unfaithful to the original, adding something really interesting to these fandoms that the fans will love even more if done correctly. But you have to understand these basics that make up these stories and make up the love that these stories have.
So yeah, let us know, what do you think is really well adapted and what is not? And for yourself, if you've seen a movie you didn't like it, what would you have changed about it to make it better? I think that's another really good exercise to challenge yourself. Just ask, hey, how could I have made a movie out of this book that I love? And see where you end up. That'll about do it from us, so we'll see you next time. Bye.
Hey guys, if you really like this video, check the one down below. You might like that one too.
And if you really like what you see, click here to subscribe.